There also was a nun, a prioress. Her way of smiling very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only, "By Saint Loy!" And she was known as Madame Eglantine. And well she sang a service, with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly, and she spoke daintily in French, extremely, after the school of Stratford at Bow, French in the Paris style she did not know. At meat her manners were well taught withal, no morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lip so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup when she had drunk. To eat, she reached a hand sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was so charitably solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap if it were dead or bleeding. And she had little dogs she would be feeding with roasted flesh, or milk, or fine white bread. And bitterly she wept if one were dead, or someone took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way, her nose was elegant, her eyes glass grey. Her mouth was very small but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the brows I own. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm. A set of beads, the gaudies, tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and lower, Amor vincit omnia. Another nun, the chaplain at her cell, was riding with her, and 3 priests as well. A monk there was, one of the finest sort, who rode the country. Hunting was his sport. A manly man. To be an abbot able. Many a dainty horse he had in stable. His bridle, when he rode, a man might hear jingling in a whistling wind, as clear, aye, and as loud as does the chapel bell where my lord monk was prior of the cell. The rule of good St. Bennet or St. Maur, as old and strict, he tended to ignore. He let go by the things of yesterday, and took the modern world's more spacious way. He did not rate that text at a plucked hen which says that hunters are not holy men, and that a monk uncloistered is a mere fish out of water, flapping on the pier, that is to say, a monk out of his cloister. That was a text he held not worth an oyster, and I agreed, and said his views were sound. Was he to study till his head went round poring over books in cloisters? Must he toil as Austin bade, and till the very soil? Was he to leave the world upon the shelf? Let Austin have his labour to himself. This monk was, therefore, a good man to horse. Greyhounds he had, as swift as birds to course. Hunting a hare or riding at a fence was all his fun. He spared for no expense. I saw his sleeves were garnished at the hand with fine grey fur, the finest in the land. And on his hood, to fasten it at his chin, he had a wrought gold, cunningly fashioned pin into a lover's knot, it seemed to pass. His head was bald and shone like looking-glass. So did his face, as if it had been greased. He was a fat and personable priest. His prominent eyeballs never seemed to settle. They glittered like the flames beneath a kettle. Supple his boots, his horse in fine condition. He was a prelate fit for exhibition. He was not pale like a tormented soul. He liked a fat swan best, and roasted whole. His palfrey was as brown as is a berry. There was a Friar, a wanton one and merry, a limiter, a very festive fellow. In all 4 orders there was none so mellow, so glib with gallant phrase and well-turned speech. He'd fixed up many a marriage, giving each of his young women what he could afford her. He was a noble pillar to his order. Highly beloved and intimate was he with county folk within his boundary, and city dames of honour and possessions, for he was qualified to hear confessions, or so he said with more than priestly scope. He had a special licence from the Pope. Sweetly he heard his penitents at shrift with pleasant absolution for a gift. He was an easy man in penance-giving, where he could hope to make a decent living. It's a sure sign whenever gifts are given to a poor order that a man's well shriven, and should he give enough, he knew in verity the penitent repented in sincerity. For many a fellow is so hard of heart he cannot weep, for all his inward smart. Therefore, instead of weeping and of prayer, one should give silver for a poor friar's care. He kept his tippet stuffed with pins for curls, and pocket-knives to give to pretty girls. And certainly his voice was gay and sturdy, for he sang well, and played the hurdy-gurdy. At sing-songs he was champion of the hour. His neck was whiter than a lily-flower, but strong enough to butt a bruiser down. He knew the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too, better than lepers, beggars, and that crew. For in so eminent a man as he, it was not fitting with the dignity of his position, dealing with a scum of wretched lepers. Nothing good can come of dealings with the slum and gutter dwellers, but only with the rich and victual sellers. But anywhere a profit might accrue, courteous he was, and lowly of service too. Natural gifts like his were hard to match. He was the finest beggar of his batch, and, for his begging district, paid a rent. His brethren did no poaching where he went. For though a widow mightn't have a shoe, so pleasant was his holy how-d'ye-do that he got his farthing from her just the same before he left, and so his income came to more than he laid out. And how he romped just like a puppy! He was ever prompt to arbitrate disputes on settling days, for a small fee, in many helpful ways. Not then appearing as your cloistered scholar with threadbare habit hardly worth $1, but much more like a doctor or a pope. Of double worsted was the semi-cope upon his shoulders, and the swelling fold about him, like a bell about its mould when it is casting, rounded out his dress. He lisped a little out of wantonness, to make his English sweet upon his tongue. When he had played his harp, or having sung, his eyes would twinkle in his head as bright as any star upon a frosty night. This worthy's name was Hubert, it appeared. There was a merchant with a forking beard and motley dress. High on his horse he sat. Upon his head a Flemish beaver hat, and on his feet daintily buckled boots. He told of his opinions and pursuits in solemn tones, and how he never lost. The sea should be kept free at any cost, he thought, upon the Harwich-Holland range. He was expert at currency exchange. This estimable merchant so had set his wits to work, none knew he was in debt. He was so stately in negotiation, loan, bargain, and commercial obligation. He was an excellent fellow all the same. To tell the truth, I do not know his name. An Oxford cleric, still a student though, one who had taken logic long ago, was there. His horse was thinner than a rake, and he was not too fat, I undertake, but had a hollow look, a sober stare. The thread upon his overcoat was bare. He had found no preferment in the church, and he was too unworldly to make search for secular employment. By his bed he preferred having 20 books in red and black of Aristotle's philosophy to having fine clothes, fiddle, or psaltery. Though a philosopher, as I have told, he had not found the stone for making gold. Whatever money from his friends he took, he spent on learning or another book, and prayed for them most earnestly, returning thanks to them thus for paying for his learning. His only care was study, and indeed he never spoke a word more than was need. Formal at that, respectful in the extreme, short to the point and lofty in his theme. The thought of moral virtue filled his speech, and he would gladly learn and gladly teach.